This is a topic tonight that we have never touched on the show before. I am joined by Michelle Hawk, and we are going to talk tonight all about alchemy. How are you, Michelle?
I'm really great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I appreciate you inviting me to be here. And that's exciting for me that you've never talked about alchemy on your show before. I'm happy to give you an introduction.
Yeah, like I've heard the word. I know I know what it is. But can you, in your own words, just sort of describe what alchemy means for those who
Yeah,
might be familiar?
of course. Yeah. And alchemy in particular, we're seeing it a lot as sort of this buzzword right now, particularly within the spiritual development like context and or personal development context. And people often associate it with transformation and also sort of mysterious and expensive, right? Like that's kind of the vibe that people usually assume when they're seeing alchemy thrown around. But I can tell you very confidently that 99% of the context that you're seeing people use the word alchemy, they're not actually talking about alchemy. They're talking about this nebulous idea of glamorous transformation. So I'm happy to demystify that here. So alchemy, again, in pop culture consciousness, we're commonly associating it with the process of turning lead into gold. And we can see this in like Harry Potter, for example. There's the alchemist Nicholas Flamel, who is actually based on an actual alchemist who creates the Philosopher's Stone. And the Philosopher's Stone, as the end product of alchemy, has the reputation for being able to turn any metal into gold and to create the elixir of life. So this is all, again, the pop culture version of alchemy, but this is actually belying the deeper spiritual aspects of this process where the practitioner themselves, the alchemists themselves, goes through this very deep process of death, purification, and rebirth, this deep alchemical transformation within their own inner crucible to transmute any base matter material of themselves, of their own consciousness, into the most illuminated, radiant version possible. So it is that lead to gold process, but through the realm of our own consciousness, through the realm of our health, our well-being, our hearts, our emotions, our mind, and our spiritual being as well. And the end result is this luminosity. It is this radiance. It is this fully actualized self where the alchemist themselves becomes the philosopher's stone. And this is kind of that nature of, claiming our own immortality, so to speak, as being very cultivated in our life force and connected with the animistic consciousness of all things everywhere.
I, as you're describing that, right? First of all, I appreciate the definition and sort of walking us through that. I find it really funny because we're recording this right around Halloween. It's very much like that. I don't know, the pop culture reference of Harry Potter sort of fits in right now, just with when
Hmm.
we're recording this. But as you're describing what alchemy actually is, it sounds like one of the most potent forms of spiritual awakening. That's
Yeah.
sort of like the image that I get, right? Somebody like seriously deep in the throes of a spiritual awakening process.
Yeah. That is definitely true, and I will say the blueprint of alchemy is universally applicable. So I talk about alchemy as in applied to the alchemist themselves, but we can also see this blueprint of transformation at work in every single area of our lives, including spiritual awakening. And at some point during this episode, if you like, I'm happy to share more about the stages of alchemy so that people can identify where they are in this cycle. And you'll see when we talk about the death, purification, and rebirth aspects of the alchemical cycle, that spiritual awakening journey very much is the death of the old identity, the death of the old beliefs, old ways of being, the old self, the purification through this inquiry of, well, what is true and who am I now? And the rebirth as the reanimated, fully connected version of our authentic selves. And of course, this is a cycle. So once you go through the alchemical cycle, once you're not done, you just get to do it over and over.
Yeah, that's the funny part with, spiritual healing, spiritual awakening. I think I've said this before on the show. It's more like this cycle, right? Like we're going through it, It's a spiral. And so just when you think that you are over something, the universe is going to throw a curveball at you. It's going to trigger you, and you're going to think, where the heck did that come from? Like, I'm over this. This isn't me. This isn't what I do. But really, you're looking at it from that new perspective of where you are on your path. So it's coming back just to further your growth. And I remember when I first got started on my path, not really being ready for that and going, I thought I was healed. Like, I have to do more. What? But we're
Yeah.
never done, right? Like, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. I find it's a balance between we're never done and also it's okay to, celebrate how far we've come and to acknowledge that at some point, I feel like there's this almost addictive nature of the death and the purification aspect of healing work within the neo-spiritual community and personal development community, where there's almost this like self-flagellatory aspect of I need to keep healing, like this whipping, like, I'm not fully actualized yet. And part of what alchemy teaches us that I love so much is we live in cycles just like nature. We look outside, and right now in the northern hemisphere we're heading into winter. The days are getting shorter, the leaves are dropping as the trees contract their energy to put it down in the roots. So the trees aren't in full fledged leafing and flowering and fruiting all the time. Like, they actually go into rest periods. And so the same is true for us, where we can go through these periods of really intense initiation, really intense and very deep healing, and then we get to integrate, then we get to stabilize, we get to coast for a minute and enjoy, and then usually the fire starts again and we get to go through another round. So I think it is really this balance of allowing ourselves to enjoy the plateaus and enjoy the rest and enjoy the space and really take in the fruits of our own labors, particularly on a healing journey where uh, often there's almost this, like, in a lot of people that I work with, particularly for women or people who are socialized feminine, particularly for nurturing caregiving types, there's this tendency to be like, oh, I have to be good enough, I have to be healed, I have to work harder. When in alchemy it teaches us there are rest points in that cycle too, and enjoyment aspects as well.
It can be such a challenge though, right? Like, I love that you mentioned that, but I feel like, especially when you flip open social media and it's, oh my God, discover your purpose in 3 days. And then, there's all this content out there that
Mhm.
just sort of gets thrown at us and leads us to believe that we have to work harder, even though everything is telling us, like, no, you can work easy. You can make it easy. But
Mhm.
there's that temptation to sort of push, push, push to
Yeah.
get to the end goal. But realistically, that's not how the universe works. Like, like, the more we push, the more the universe pushes back, it seems, right?
Mhm. I mean, I think it's a balance of there are times when it's good to push and it's good to put in effort and to work hard. And there are times when it's good to sit back and allow. And of course there always is that balance. And as I developed and I teach a 200-hour alchemy certification training. And so within this course, it's a year-long deep dive apprenticeship, and we study this cycle of transformation. We study the cycle of energy so that we know as practitioners or as the alchemists of our lives, we know that it's our personal will and desire and our personal efforting in collaboration and calibrated to divine will and desire and calibrated to these spiritual forces that are so far beyond us, so that there's if we're pushing but we're trying to swim upstream, then it's just not going to go well. But if we're pushing and efforting, trying to swim with the current, we're just going to zip along way faster. So I think there's the balance of when and where it's appropriate for us to really apply ourselves into effort and to recognize, Elizabeth, like you said, of are we pushing against spirit? Are we pushing against universal law, against natural law? Or are we efforting to align ourselves and apply our energy in an effective and calibrated way that is actually going to propel us very far? And
Mm.
we cultivate that through discernment and through knowing how these cycles work. So, in learning the cycle of alchemy, this is then a spiritual technology that we get to apply effectively and efficiently in our lives. I tell people, choose change before change chooses you. So by demystifying the process of transformation and actually understanding how it works, we get to work with that cycle of transformation rather than feeling like we're being dragged around by the heel.
Ooh, I love everything that you just said.
Thank you. Mic drop moment. There we go.
um, I want to take a step back for a minute because I don't want to lose this. Um, how did you get started in this work?
I started as a young kiddo, as I think most of us do in a certain way, where, we're all born as the most authentic version of ourselves that we can possibly be. And then through life and societal conditioning, we lose touch with that. I was a very magical kiddo. I was always interested in mythology and indigenous folktales and animistic stories. So, in animism, the little mini definition of animism is the basis for all shamanic practice. It is the belief that everything is alive and everything is connected through this universal life force. So, in all of my favorite stories, all the animals could talk and all the plants had healing powers and magic was real and people collaborated with the forces of earth and with dragons. And looking back, okay, I was really interested in mysticism. That was just what really called to me and what really spoke to me. So I kind of fell into shamanic practice. I just happened to stumble into a shamanic workshop when I was 15 years old. This was in 2003. And within that workshop, I found a vocabulary to basically give a context for everything that I already felt and thought about the world, everything that I already felt was true. I leaned in more. I started studying and practicing shamanism, and pursuing workshops wherever I could. Also, keep in mind this was the early 2000s, so you couldn't Google shaman near me like you can now. And so I was following the breadcrumbs of pursuing workshops and getting referrals from teachers wherever I could. And I also started studying energy healing, with Reiki and with other lineages of energy healing and energy medicine in 2006. So that kind of paralleling my experience. I was in university at the time, earning my degree in biology and also studying energy medicine. So that was a very interesting, like, science and spirituality education happening simultaneously and concurrently. And I met my current shaman mentor in 2009. I've been working with her pretty continuously on and off, but pretty consistently since then. So that's 15 years now. And I've been working with Alchemy since I think 2015 or 2016. And I developed, as I mentioned, this year long 200-hour certification training course. I've been teaching that for several years. I'm halfway through my fifth cohort of that apprenticeship right now, and I'm inviting people in for next year.
That is amazing. Like you just sort of knew. Like you just were following the path the whole time.
I was following the path even though I had no idea where it was going, and I was kind of resistant for every step of the way. Like, I can tell you about every new evolution of my practice. And also my practice, I've been in business since 2009. I opened a business because people wanted to pay me for what I was already interested in doing. So my mom was like, "Hey, Michelle, you can set up an LLC and actually, like, have a legal way to take money for this." So that's how I started my business. And thanks, mom. And and every evolution of my practice has been, initially I met it with a lot of resistance. So yes, I was following the path, and also I was following those initiations like you were talking about, Elizabeth, of that spirit leading me, and initially like, okay, that sounds cool, but I don't want to do that part. And then and so I'll tell you what this looks like. It looked like at the beginning I was really only ever interested in working with animals. I was offering animal communication, animal healing work, animal energy healing work, and shamanic work. And then people had such profound experiences with their animals, like really incredible healing for their animals. And they would ask me, "Hey, Michelle, can you do a session for me?" And I said, "No, no, no, I don't work with people. I only work with animals." And then enough people asked me that I was like, "Okay, fine." And then people started asking me, "Can you teach me how to do that?" And I said, "No, no, no, I don't teach. I don't want to teach." But people kept asking me. I was like, "Okay, fine." And then with people asking me to teach, there were all these resistance points. And eventually I figured out the pattern. So at that point, I was like, all right, when people are asking me to do stuff, it's not like, "Oh, Michelle, you have to do this thing you don't want to do." It's, here is spirit beckoning you to step into the next evolution of your higher service. So I
Mm.
started listening and identifying these callings, these beckonings, as they were inviting me forward to continue to evolve as a practitioner, to continue to grow in my own personal process, and then translating that into my healthy, thriving higher service for other people, both in terms of supporting practitioners in their spiritual skill development and supporting non practitioners in their deep healing and evolution.
I love this. Like, I'm curious though, you were a bio major.
Mhm.
Did you feel like, or was there ever a point where, as you were going through that, you were met or you found yourself with more resistance because now you have that, um well, the scientific side is like, in some cases could push almost directly up against, like there's could be that friction between the two. So was there ever a point where you felt either this confusion or you found almost like even more resistance coming up in you as you were going through that?
Not at all, actually. I did experience external resistance in the form of my pre-med classmates kind of poo-pooing my claims that, gosh, perhaps energy medicine has a role to play in modern medicine and health. And of course, this was like, again, early 2000s, 2006 to, little to later 2000s. And people kind of making fun of me. "Oh, Michelle, you're such a hippie," whatever. And now I feel very vindicated by all the research that's coming out about holistic wellness and the power of, and it's barely scratching the surface, right? People are talking about mindset, and people are talking about like, "Oh, meditation, whatever." And here I am steeped in ancient mysticism and really ancient spiritual technology that has been around for thousands and thousands of years, that has a very long history of the benefits on not only physical health and well-being, mental, emotional, and spiritual health and well-being and consciousness as well. So I'm over here feeling very ahead of the game. But in my inner experience, no, I didn't experience that resistance. I really, to me, science and spirituality have always felt like two different systems of investigating the same cosmic truths. And this is where I love alchemy, because alchemy is both a science and a spiritual practice. And we can look back, thousands of years ago, or, anywhere between hundreds and thousands of years ago, the original alchemists were scientists. And we have alchemy to thank for all of our modern sciences. So, the root of the word chemistry is the same as the root of the word alchemy, alchemy, chemistry,
Ah.
right? So we have alchemists to thank for the periodic table, because these are ancient alchemists asking questions about life, saying, "What is life? What is this made of?" And working to break down things into their elemental constitution, working to understand the body, working to understand the humors of the body. Of course, they didn't, get it all quote technically correct in terms of what we know now through modern medicine, but really it's the alchemy is the study of life. How does life work? What is life made of? What is consciousness? What is the universe? The study of the stars and the planets and the seasons and all beings on earth. Like, alchemy is science. And it is spiritual practice, because it studies the mysteries of all of creation, in order to master the process of transformation and translate that into one's personal experience of full actualization. So for
Mm.
me, spirituality and science like belong together. I think they're both great. I think they're very, very valuable. And I recognize, in modern Western medicine and modern Western science, both the benefits and drawbacks of, for example, the scientific method and scientific community, the process of scientific inquiry. We have the, propose a theory or a hypothesis, come up with a research plan, work with your research, analyze your data, refute or prove or offer support to the hypothesis. Like that's how science works, which is simultaneously like very very great because it's really structured and it's really organized, and also it's inherently very limiting because science is really really great at isolating variables, but as we know in the universe, we do not nothing exists in isolation. So this is where science is really at a disadvantage when it comes to understanding the rich tapestry and complexities of life and health and well-being. And this is where systems like, within the medical field, for example, Western medicine is really great at patch jobs. They're great at fixing broken bones and repairing people after traumatic accidents. And Western medicine really sucks at actual wellness. But
Mm.
systems like Taoism and Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, right? Really great at actual wellness because they're working within a holistic and complex tapestry of well-being before the symptoms get so loud that you can't possibly ignore them. So it's working with like more stable, more sustainable, more subtle aspects of anchoring in wellness, working with movement practices, working with qigong, working with herbs, working with acupuncture, working with organizing energy in the body. That supports actual wellness. So looking at, okay, and the alchemy that I practice is both from the Western Hermetic tradition and also the Eastern Taoist tradition and working with qigong. Um, and so looking at, okay, alchemy itself as both a science and a spiritual practice, what is the point of doing this? Well, the point of doing this is taking our own seat of power in the process of transformation in our lives, recognizing that if we're not changing, we're dying because everything is always changing. And if we're disconnected from that cycle of transformation as it's moving through us organically, then we're existing in this weird, static, like void, and nothing on earth lives in a static void. So it's taking our own seat in this universal cycle and understanding that cycle so we can collaborate with it fluently in our life rather than feeling like life is happening to us. Which a lot of people who don't, a lot of people are very afraid of change. A lot of people have blockages and resistance and fear because no one never teaches us how transformation works. It's very scary. And this
Yeah.
is unfortunately normal in our modern Western society. We live a life where most people are inside a lot of the time. There's some people who just don't go outside at all during the day. I'm like,
Hmm.
can you get fresh air? Do you see what the light is doing? Do you know what the moon is doing right now? And for most people, the answer is no. And so, as a result of being so disconnected from the cycles of nature, we become very disconnected from the cycles of change in the world and disconnected from our own power and our own sovereignty in creating that transformation and change for ourselves and our lives.
Ooh. So I want to go a little bit deep right now. Like, I'm going to ask you this question, and I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but I think about the world today, right? And there's distraction after distraction after distraction. And we have all of these systems that keep coming out that just, try this new technology, AI. I mean, we could go on forever listing them, but how do we encourage people to recognize that we do need to stay connected? Because there are, I don't want to, knock on social media, right? This is how you and I connected. Like, there's some benefits to it for sure.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like, how do we as a society start to come together and have a better conversation around, are there limits? What are the limits? How do we use these in a way that won't hurt us? Like, we can live in tandem with these technologies and systems, but at the end of the day, we do still need to thrive, and there's certain things we need to do to be able to take care of ourselves. How do we continue to encourage that?
Mm. Yeah, Elizabeth, I think one of the pieces is recognizing, as you said, the usefulness of these tools and treating them as tools, and recognizing the the way in which these tools are most effective and most helpful for us. And this is true with all tools. So like imagine you're trying to build a house and you have a tool belt full of tools, but you don't know how to use them. So you're going to try to install the plumbing with a saw, right? Like, so that's a, it's not that the saw itself is a useless tool. It's just that you're not using it in the correct application for its highest efficacy.
Mm.
So in these cases, we can look at like, okay, well, what is the tool of, for example, you throw out social media. What is the tool of social media for? On one hand, it is a tool owned by a platform that is using it as a tool to bring in money through ads and through content creation, right? So that's like what how Meta is using social media as a tool. But as a user and a content creator, how are we using this as a tool? Okay. Um, I uh, I enjoy Instagram sometimes. I don't really like posting on Instagram a lot, but I enjoy consuming from Instagram. And primarily what I consume from Instagram are like dog videos and also cooking stuff. So I've gotten some really awesome recipes that I have actually made in my kitchen, and it's a way also that I can kind of promote podcast episodes and like comment on people's stuff that I enjoy, and find other people who are doing work that I enjoy with. So I'm not using it as filling any kind of void in my life. This is the other thing. Like I'm using it as a light touch amusement connection. I'm not overly reliant on social media. Like most of my business has nothing to do with social media because I also know the limitations of that platform. As content creators, we don't own anything that we put on these platforms. We do, and it could all vanish tomorrow, whatever Meta decides to do. So, and I know different social media platforms have different regulations. So I think there's also this, the more resourced we are in other areas of our lives, the less we rely on these tools like social media to do jobs that they're not actually supposed to do. So what I mean by that is, for example, for somebody who is, like myself, I have a business, most of which has nothing to do with social media. I have my email list, I have my website, I have my podcast, I have my organic referral network, I have my offerings, I have my video platforms, and I engage with social media as kind of like a little thing on the side. Same with my social connections. I have very meaningful friendships. I have um, communities that I'm a part of. I am in partnership with someone that I love and care about. I walk my dog and hang out with the dog neighbors. Like I have I'm well resourced because I'm well cultivated in these areas. So for me, I'm not relying on social media to do anything other than what it is technically supposed to be for, which is kind of this casual, you know, connection mechanism. Now that's my definition of what it is supposed to be for, but for somebody else, for example, who may not be well resourced, maybe they feel really alone in their lives, maybe they work in a job that they don't have a lot of social connection, or maybe they're a content creator who's relying on social media to as a platform to host their stuff. That platform then takes on a very different role. Like that tool has a different function in their lives. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm saying that if they're engaging with it in a way that is discerning and intelligent and boundaried, then good for them. And also there are many people who, as I mentioned, who are not resourced, not well resourced or well cultivated in some of these areas, and they might end up engaging with social media in a way that is actually detrimental to their well-being, furthering a sense of isolation, comparisonitis, perfectionism, and the addiction of the scroll,
Mm.
really. So and of course social media is not the only thing like this out there. There's, watching the news is the same kind of deal, shopping, like there's all sorts of like these mindless addictive behaviors that we can fall into. And really, like, if I think the dangers with them are if people just can't tell that it's harming them, right? Like if they just can't recognize that because they are not well resourced, because they don't know what like good, healthy friendship connection feels like, and they get, sucked into mean social media stuff. And I see teenagers with this, I see kids with this, like, my partner's 15-year-old nephew, we were just debating about Snapchat and how his parents won't let him have Snapchat. And we're talking about, oh, that one friend of his turned into a huge meanie, a huge bully since he got on Snapchat, and talking about why that is and what the availability of these technologies really does to people's constitution and people's behavior.
I love that you are framing it this way, because I think you mentioned comparisonitis, and I think there could be this tendency to say, well, I have to do my business this way because so many others are showing that they are, but it's not going to work for everybody, like you said. And I think there's some really great call outs that you made with that. And for those who are not into the social media to build your business, I think it's an important message to give, that like you can still have a thriving business doing it in a way that resonates with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, when we're talking about energy, that resonates into your posts, it resonates into what you're putting out there.
Yeah.
And so for those who are looking and saying, I don't want to build it this way, but I feel like I have to, framing it in the way you just did is just, it's like, you can take it a step back, you can take a breath. No, like you can find your right way and
Mm-hmm.
how to incorporate these tools, but know that it's not the only way.
Yeah.
Um,
Really, definitely.
oh,
As oh, just to speak to that a little bit, we've been talking for what, over half an hour now. Short form content is not my strong suit. I know for a fact that anything that I were to put in a 7-second reel, which I think is kind of what gets promoted and kicked really high in algorithms, is like 7 seconds or less, is useless to me because everything I do is engaged with this like long-term, in-depth, subtle process. Transformation doesn't happen in 7 seconds. Flashy nonsense happens in 7 seconds. So for me, that platform is pretty useless. And I tried to engage with it previously. I really did. And then I decided, you know what? I'm just not going to try to force myself to fit in that box anymore. And as a result, I've been exploring other platforms such as podcasting. Being a guest on other people's podcasts has been a really wonderful way not only to connect with other people who are in this really amazing service role, such as yourself, Elizabeth, but also for me to connect with other audiences and other people in the way that suits my personal zone of genius, which is talking at length about the mysteries. So this
I
so
love
this this is what I do instead of social media, basically.
I love it.
Mhm.
And I mean, Michelle, like everything that you have said, I think is so important. I want to go back to the stages of alchemy. Like I know we took sort of a detour there.
That's okay.
Um, but we never quite know where the episode's gonna go, and it works. So we're just gonna go with it.
Totally.
Stages of alchemy. Uh, I think it's important for people to recognize, especially if they feel after listening to this that they're called to study in this way, and to go a little bit deeper, and they're curious, like where are they in those stages. So can you sort of walk us through what that looks like?
Absolutely. I'll walk you through this and then I'll also invite everybody. Don't go find me on social media because you won't find anything. But you might. But if you go to my website, Michelle Hawk, my name, michellehawk.com, there is also a guide to the stages of alchemy that you can download for free. So I'm going to give you kind of the light touch version, and then and I'm going to say some fancy alchemy words that you don't have to remember because it's in the guide. So if you want to have a written map for that, then that resource exists for you. So let this wash over you and then go look at that for more.
Love it.
Yeah, so the stages of alchemy and how to identify where we are in the stages of alchemy, and then also like where people usually get stuck in this cycle of transformation. I will say it's very helpful to know, so like what I offer to people. Like again, we're getting the very very brief version because I teach, like I said, a 200-hour certification. It's actually more like 250 hours or something, a lot. Um, and and you can go really deep with this. And so please, just treat this as kind of an initial identifying, okay, what's the energy doing for you? So alchemy is divided into 3 phases, which are then further subdivided. So just our terminology that we're working with here is alchemy umbrella. Under that, 3 phases, which are death, purification, and rebirth. And then those are further subdivided into 7 stages. So I'll tell you kind of as we're breaking this down further. So the first stage of alchemy, which is in the death phase, is called calcination. And calcination is the loss and death of physical structures. It means to take it down to the bone. And so this is, ways in which we might be seeing or experiencing calcination type experiences or activities in our lives are losing a loved one, ending a relationship, losing a job, moving to a new home. Even cleaning out your closet is a calcination activity because you're removing stuff. You're clearing out physical structures. And so, and by physical structures, also, your body, your relationships, your finances, your home. And so this is where a lot of people are afraid to enter into the cycle because the cycle of alchemy begins with loss. Now, most people, when I ask them, and here's like a little caveat or a little like segue, or what's the word I want to say? We're going off a slight ramp, but I promise it'll circle back. It's related. Tangent. There we go. We're going on a slight tangent. Okay. So when I ask people, how does transformation work? What do you think of when you think of transformation? They start a few stages in. They start with, oh, I think about what I want to move into, and I visualize where I want to go, and I, start analyzing and make a vision board. That is useful, but it's just not what we do first. So first in alchemy begins with death. We know that rebirth cannot come without death. New seeds cannot sprout without the old stuff decaying first. So just like in our bodies, we get rid of old cells every single day, and then we compost those materials to then make new cells. So this is a very, very real, very relevant process of letting stuff go. So alchemy begins with calcination, which is the loss and death of physical structures. And then we shift into the second stage, which is still in the death phase. This is called dissolution, like dissolving. And dissolution is the loss or death of energetic and emotional structures. This is where people do grief work. This is where our beliefs about ourselves, like you were talking about in spiritual awakening, Elizabeth, like people go through this real hard. You have a spiritual awakening. All of a sudden you're like questioning, who am I? What do I believe? All of my conditioning is a lie. You start losing friends. People think you're crazy. You have to quit your job because you can't be in this soul sucking environment anymore. That is calcination and dissolution all over. That is a big old death phase right there. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And people out there, I'm sure, like, oh, I can relate. Yay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I promise there's more beyond that. Okay. So we've got calcination, loss of physical structures, dissolution, loss of energetic and emotional structures. Again, that's a really like working with a lot of heart stuff, working with a lot of grief stuff, a lot of processing. And then we shift into the purification phase. So both of those were the death phase. Now, excuse me, now we're shifting into purification phase. Stage 3 of alchemy is called separation. This is where most people think transformation starts. This is the analysis stage where we're working with perspective, discernment, and sorting stuff out. Okay, so we take the results of the death phase where we threw it in the fire of calcination and we dissolved it in the waters of dissolution. And then here's the thing about alchemy. We don't get to pick and choose what gets alchemized. We must surrender fully to the crucible, and then we trust that whatever makes it through is based in truth and universal law. Because anything that is not true or not authentic doesn't survive. So
Wow.
imagine you're like, okay, I surrender to this process, and you move through this death phase. You don't get rid of all your clothes, you just get rid of the ones that don't fit anymore that you don't like. Right? Or maybe you quit your job, but you still stay friends with those like 2 coworkers that you really got along with. Okay, so they made it through to the other side. And again, you might quit your job and you don't talk to your coworkers anymore, but you keep the skills that you learned and that you keep the knowledge that is going to serve you moving forward. Okay, so the separation stage is where we're evaluating. We're evaluating, what am I keeping, what am I getting rid of based on this process. We're sorting, we're seeing, oh, you know what? I'm really happy with this skill set. I learned a lot in this relationship. Now I definitely know, I know I definitely don't want that. And I definitely do want this. So with my next partner, I'm going to look for ABC instead of XYZ. Right. So it's this, we get to put our minds to work and figure stuff out and make a vision board, and which people like to start with. And then I told you there was a place for that. Okay. And now we shift into the fourth stage, which is called conjunction. And conjunction is where we start to put that into a rudimentary form. This is the recombination, selective recombination. So we're taking, okay, here's the stuff that survived the death phase. And here's the stuff that I'm keeping. And then also I'm bringing in a couple new things because now that I threw out all my old clothes or donated all my old clothes, like I need a couple new things. So I'm going to go to the thrift store, or go to the, craft market or whatever. And now I have my new things, and you're putting it together in a new way. But it's not the final version. This is where one of the places people get stuck. Actually, people can get stuck at any one of those stages. I'm not going to go into that so deep right now because I'm not going to give you like this massive download, but some of that is in the guide that I mentioned. So you can look at, where do people get stuck in the stages? What are the common pitfalls, and then how to avoid them, and practices to move through each stage. So in conjunction, people get stuck thinking, oh, that's the final version. I put something together, but that's like writing a first draft of a book and not editing it, which we know is very silly, right?
Yep.
So you have your first draft of putting things back together, and then we shift again into the rebirth phase. Now we're shifting into the rebirth reanimation phase. So we enter stage 5 of alchemy, which is called fermentation. And fermentation is where we receive that infusion of spirit. And fermentation, like we have in chemical fermentation, like we know from chemical fermentation, if you've ever made kombucha or sauerkraut or anything, there's this process where, like, at first it's just a jar of rotting cabbage, but then something magical happens as the microbes do their work and it becomes alive. It actually becomes very nutritious and healthy and full of probiotics and full of really magical stuff. Okay, so that
Hmm.
is in chemical fermentation. And in the process of our own transformation, there's this infusion of energy, the spiritization that reconnects this rudimentary form from conjunction with spiritual essence, the reanimation. It's like Frankenstein's monster going from, like, kind of this bunch of body parts sewn together to that, sits up and becomes awake.
Hmm.
Okay. And then in stage 6, which is still within the rebirth, so we're all in the rebirth phase now. Stage 6 is called distillation. And so distillation, again, from chemical distillation, as we know, it's the process of really, like, the condensation. It's like repeated evaporation and condensation of alcohol, for example, or a chemical, to create this very, very pure concentrated essence. And so as you're, in the example of making alcohol, you can, you create this very, very strong alcohol, like 100 proof, whatever. But it's very concentrated, very pure. You can just have a very small amount of it, or you need a very small amount of it. So energetically, as we're moving through this process of distillation, it's the purification of our own inner essence. As you yourself, the alchemist, have gone through this process of purification, or excuse me, through the process of transformation, you've received that reanimation, coming back to life, and now figuring out, okay, what is the pure essence? For those of us who are practitioners, and anyone who has ever had to market themselves, we have this experience of, okay, what is the core truth, the core why of what I'm doing, why I do what I'm doing, the core client that I'm here to serve, the core transformation that I offer, the core marketing message, or whatever it is. This is a very entrepreneurial lens. But the same is true of whatever system you're using, or whatever area of your life you're applying alchemy to. Okay, so you have that new relationship that you started in conjunction. You met the new person that you're dating. And then in fermentation, like, where a relationship just, it goes from dating somebody to becoming a relationship, like it receives this infusion of energy and kind of this third entity is born that is the relationship itself, right? That's the reanimation of love. And then there's the distillation of, okay, now we're figuring out who are we together? Like who are we as a couple? And coming into purifying, like what are our relational agreements and like, us, the usness, just to give another like area of life example where we see that. And then the seventh stage of alchemy is the actualization. It's called coagulation. So coagulation, think of like your blood coagulating. If you cut yourself and then your blood starts clotting to like make this condensed little patch so you don't bleed anymore, right? So same with you can think of energies coagulating into the philosopher's stone. It's like not a very sexy term, but it's that the condensing to become the final product of the philosopher's stone. So this is the stage where, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, getting to relax and enjoy, getting to sit in your own actualization and appreciate the cycle that you've been through and then prepare to enter the cycle again.
Mm, I love it. There's as you're talking us through this, how much overlap is there between these stages? Like, I would imagine it's not as clear cut as, okay, for 7 days I'm in this phase, and then 7 days I'm in this one, right? So,
Right.
what does it look like as you put this together?
You're correct. So alchemy is not linear and it's not like the timing isn't arbitrary. So I tell this actually, I had alchemy class with my current apprentices right before we got on this call. And I reminded them again, and I remind them regularly that the timeline of alchemy is not an arbitrary thing. So within my course, my 200-hour course, which is a year long, we get to spend about 7 weeks in each stage because that's how I'm delivering the materials and giving people time to do the practices and really dig into the study and the embodiment of each stage in alchemy. But that's not how we actually experience in life. So to your point about overlap, I would say it is possible for people to be in multiple stages of alchemy at once. Particularly like calcination and dissolution very often go together. As we are releasing physical structures from our lives, we're often going through a simultaneous energetic and emotional process of that loss as well. And we can also have people be in one stage of alchemy in one area of their life, and then in a different stage of alchemy in a different area of their life. And the stages also can take different amounts of time. So people can, spend years in a dissolution stage if they're going through, for example, the very difficult prolonged grief of losing a loved one. If that dissolution is carrying on for a very long time, or perhaps that dissolution is kind of always happening in the background if someone is going through a very deep grief, or someone is like I've also seen people loop within a few stages. I used to have this challenge myself. Like, I tell you, once I learned the roadmap to alchemy, it really helped me to actually do something different within my own patterns, because I saw that I was really great at the first 3 stages of alchemy, but then as soon as I got to conjunction, where it was time to actually start a new thing, I just got kicked back to the first stage over and over, and I just kept looping in this like cleaning up old messes stuff without actually moving in new directions. So, and I learned
Mm.
that very, very quickly when I started working with alchemy in like 2015 or 2016. So once I did, I was able to do things differently, and I was able to make some really powerful changes to build new things in my life, which, is really what we're here to do, is to continue to grow and create newness in our lives. So yes, Elizabeth, you're totally right. We can be in multiple stages at once. And yeah, there's no arbitrary timeline of it.
What I have, so I'm going to ask this, and then I want to talk about your course a little bit. I'm curious, for those that are listening, like, are there dangers if you try to skip steps? Because I would imagine, right, we go through the first couple where we have this grief, we have this loss, relationships are ending, people are falling away, things are falling away, right? We want to rush the process and get
Mhm.
to that end state. So, but realistically, like when we take a step back, are there, and if so, what are the dangers of like trying to skip that middle section?
Yeah. I would say I wouldn't necessarily call it dangers. I would just say more like pitfalls or like it doesn't work. So imagine, for example, that somebody's wanting um to skip over or to rush through like the dissolution stage, for example. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I've been like losing so much lately. I just want to skip ahead and start like building a new thing." So imagine we see this, for example, in people who have toxic dating patterns, and they end up dating different people who are basically different versions of the same archetypal person over and over and over again. It's like, why do you just keep picking the same person? Okay, well, it's because they never actually let the version of themselves that wanted that die. And there's unprocessed energy. And of course, we can look at this through many lenses and attachment theory, etc. But through the alchemical lens, we would say that person never fully went through the process of dissolution to to fully release those energetic and emotional aspects of their own inner architecture, and then separation in order to discern the healthy new things that they're wanting and building, and then conjunction to build those new structures in themselves. So the danger would be, or the pitfall would be, that, well, you never actually transform, like you just end up doing the same thing for your entire life. And also that any efforts that you did try to put into transformation would be ineffective. So then when that happens, people get discouraged. People experience learned helplessness, which is, the like, oh gosh, I just keep trying and trying and trying to make changes and it never works. So I'm just going to give up. Right? Or people end up, having a lot of evidence of, um, like, oh, I am just this way, which then further reinforces beliefs about themselves and their own disempowerment, and then can further wounding, unfortunately. So, yeah, those would be the dangers or pitfalls of not engaging with this in a healthy way or trying to skip steps. It actually, and you know what? I think dangers is a good word. Like that can actually be very damaging for people for many reasons.
Mm. So I'll share this real quick. Like I know for myself, wanting to get to that end state, like it we I was very impatient, in various points in my life, because it's nobody wants to sit in the grief. It doesn't feel good, right? And there's this fear, I think, of that pain and letting that pain just be what it is. But going through the process, and you get so much more out of it when you allow yourself to feel that, and move through it. One of the things that I know I had to learn was that is not going to hurt me. Like it's temporary. And when you realize that, and that it is truly for your highest good, you can it's almost like taking it with a little spoon of honey, because like it's not
Yeah.
for nothing.
Yeah.
And it's not going to last forever. It is truly a cycle, a season. um
Yeah.
so you're
Elizabeth, can I expound on that just for a moment? Because you hit on something really
absolute.
important there.
Yes,
Okay. So
please.
this, again, one of a fear that I hear from people who are, approaching or entering into this cycle is, I'm afraid that if I start crying, I'll never stop. Or I'm afraid that if I actually let that thing go that I know really doesn't fit me anymore, then I'll never be able to build anything new. And as you said, there's, this, like, the victory of proving to ourselves that we can do hard things. That is definitely part of the value of engaging with alchemy, is cultivating our own sense of self-trust and resilience. And more than that, when we actually know the architecture of how transformation works, this is one of the reasons why I find alchemy to be the most powerful transformational tool I have ever come across. And again, I've been doing this for over 20 years now. My list of certifications and trainings that I've done is super long. And alchemy, I'm telling you, is the most effective tool for transformation because it is literally how transformation works. Like that's all it does. That's its thing. So it is the blueprint of here is how, according to natural law, according to universal law, this is the promise of universal law that teaches us how this cycle works. So here, the universe is guaranteeing you this pain and this discomfort of this loss is temporary because, as we see, winter doesn't last forever. Spring is always around the corner. And so, even if you are engaging with a cycle of loss, we know, according to universal law, that after that comes this purification process and then comes rebirth. And you can't have rebirth without going through the death part first. So I feel like, and when I talk with my students about this, they have these experiences of like, wow, it's so freeing to just trust in the cycle of transformation and to just trust the stages of alchemy, because then it's like it's giving me this permission to experience it so fully because I just trust that there's this other thing around the corner, and I can lean in and not get lost in it and not get too fixated on how uncomfortable this part might be, because I know that if I lean into it fully, then I will transmute what I need to transmute, and then I can do something else.
Mm, I love that. And one quick little nugget with it, I
Mhm.
promise you, if you surrender to it, it you get through it that much faster.
Yeah.
Like, I remember, allowing allowing the surrender to happen, and how hard I cried and cried. But
Yeah.
if I stopped it, it it just prolongs that first stage or second stage. So
Yep.
let yourself go through it for anybody who's listening. Um,
Yeah.
I want to, as we finish up, like I want to just give people a little more insight into the course that you offer, the 200-hour certification, and then beyond that, how can people work with you?
Thank you. Yes, so the 200-hour course is a year-long apprenticeship that begins every spring. Will begin in March of 2025, and excuse me. And of course, podcast episodes live forever. So if you're tuning into this in the future, you can still circle back with me. And it's a year-long deep dive apprenticeship that includes practical experiential learning. There's an online component, so I do have students all over the world, and then there's also an immersive in-person experiential education component of you come for retreats with your cohort. You get some one-on-one work with me as well as part of that. And it ends up being this very deep dive, very, you're in the crucible of transformation, and you're also learning tools and practices that if you are a practitioner, you can receive certification that then you apply this in your own work. So it is intended for not like brand newbie beginners. Like if you just had your spiritual awakening yesterday, this is not for you. But if you've been on the path at least for a little while, and you have some aspect of personal practice, some aspect of energy work, and you're looking for, I would say like intermediate, light intermediate to advanced. I also have some very established, very long-term practitioners joining me in this course as well to support their spiritual skill development. But most people who come in are at the light to intermediate zone of education, and it is real. Honestly, it's really fun. It's so much fun, and I very selfishly just really enjoy sharing this with people because, as I mentioned, it's the most powerful transformational tool I have yet come across. And it is very humbling and beautiful for me to witness the profound transformations that my students go through. So this is you will be changed by this work. And again, you can find that through my website, michellehawk.com. You can also reach out to me through my website for other work that I offer, such as one-on-one mentorship. If alchemy isn't right for you, but you still like what I have to say, or perhaps you're, excuse me, if you're like, yes, I want to take alchemy, but I might be a little more beginner on that end of the spectrum, then come work with me. Come take some other programs or courses that I have to offer so we can get you prepared for alchemy. Because I definitely have people who come in that door as well who are like, yes, I want that, and I'm not ready yet. So let's get you ready so that you can shift into your alchemical apprenticeship as soon as possible.
Oh, I love it. Michelle, thank you so, so, so much.
Thank
Um,
you.
we'll have your website in the show notes. Nobody, we can't reach her on social media, guys. But
Well, you
we'll
can, I just don't do a lot there. I mean, but yeah, go to my website. You can bet much better to go through my website. You can download that free guide to alchemy that I mentioned that goes much more into detail, excuse me, more into detail about the stages, helps you identify where you get stuck, or maybe you already were able to identify just from me describing it, but this helps you figure out where do people get stuck, what practices to apply, and it also has an alchemy activation prayer and meditation that you can tune into. So please do download that, and then please feel free to reach out. You can book a consultation with me for the alchemy course if you want to. You can, chat with me about your journey and see what kind of support is right for you.
I love it. Michelle, thank you so much. Guys, we're going to wrap up the way we do every episode. Remember, you are never stuck, you are never lost, and you are never, ever alone. At any given moment, you can use your power to pivot, make a new choice, and start again. We'll talk with everyone on the next episode. Thanks again, Michelle.
Thank you, Elizabeth.